Welcome to this module on compliance and enforcement. In this module, we'll be learning about the accident prevention model, compliance, and enforcement. At BC Safety Authority, we use the accident prevention model to ensure we are protecting the public. This model relies on 4 pillars: assessment, education and outreach, research, and enforcement. It's important to remember that all 4 pillars are equally important to ensure public safety. We use assessment or inspection to support technical safety by assessing high-risk work, systems, and equipment in our jurisdiction and enforcing change if we see a problem. Education helps to prevent accidents by giving people in the safety system the tools to do the work correctly. Research helps us gather and share information so we can better assess safety risks. And finally, enforcement is sometimes required when duty holders neglect their safety responsibilities. In this video, we'll be focusing on the enforcement pillar, and we'll specifically cover the purpose of enforcement action, the types of enforcement action, how permits are linked to enforcement, and finish by talking about what it means to be non-compliant. So what is enforcement? Simply put, enforcement is the use of sanctions to change behavior, not to punish. Most people, like yourself, will do everything possible to stay compliant and avoid enforcement action. For example, in most cases, a certificate of inspection, tech talk, or a meeting with a safety officer will promote a non-compliant party to change behavior. However, in some instances, enforcement is required. BCSA uses a progressive enforcement approach, which means we start with small enforcement actions to encourage behavior change and progress to more serious enforcement action if and when it is required. The purpose is to ensure that enforcement actions are appropriate, predictable, and consistent. So why does enforcement matter? First, enforcement encourages a culture of compliance and safety. Second, it shows that action will be taken against those who don't comply with provincial acts and regulations. Third, it reduces the competitive advantage of those operating outside of the safety system. And finally, it alters the behavior of those who have been subject to enforcement action. Enforcement action is designed to put pressure on those who are consistently non-compliant. It's our way of protecting your interests as a business person in the safety system. So, what kinds of enforcement actions can BCSA use? There are 3 types of enforcement action: compliance orders, monetary penalties, and discipline orders. Compliance orders are issued by safety officers to order an action to be taken or an action to be ceased. For example, a safety officer might issue a compliance order to correct non-compliances, stop performing regulated work without permit, or stop operating a certain type of equipment. Monetary penalties are essentially fines issued by a safety manager to penalize non-compliant behavior. For example, a safety manager might issue a monetary penalty for failure to comply with a compliance order, failure to comply with a safety order, or performing work beyond the scope of a license. It's important to be aware that the monetary penalty amount can be as high as $100,000, and that BCSA has the right to register the monetary penalty amount with the court, and that becomes a judgment of the court, or court enforced, which may result in asset seizure. A discipline order is a tool that allows a provincial safety manager to impose any sanction which they deem reasonable and necessary. For example, the provincial safety manager might issue a discipline order which suspends or revokes a license or permit, or modifies or attaches conditions to a license or certificate of qualification. Examples of when a discipline order might be issued include a person or contractor breaches a condition of a license, or a person or contractor undertakes work for which they are not qualified or licensed to perform. Certain technologies require a surety bond as a condition of the license. The Safety Standards General Regulations authorizes BC Safety Authority to call this bond if the permit holder fails to correct non-compliances. When this happens, the surety or insurance company is responsible to have the non-compliances corrected. This is considered a compliance action rather than an enforcement action. If the bond is pulled, the license is suspended. So, how are permits related to enforcement? Enforcement actions can be issued for a number of reasons, one of which is not obtaining the appropriate permit for the regulated work performed or equipment operated. For example, let's take a look at Joe. He's a Class B gas fitter. Joe wants to make extra money, so he's been replacing gas furnaces and water heaters for family and friends on the side. Although qualified to do the work, Joe is not a licensed gas contractor and is not able to take out a permit for the work he is doing. Permits are important for two reasons. The first reason is that they are required by law. A permit is permission authorizing regulated work to be performed or equipment to be operated in the province of British Columbia. In BC, installation permits are required for most regulated work prior to work being performed. If you do not obtain a permit prior to performing regulated work, when a permit is required, you are subject to enforcement action. The second reason is that permits provide a record of work being performed in BC. This allows BCSA to assess the risk of regulated work, allows BCSA and asset owners to track history, condition, and maintenance. It helps to ensure work is being done by qualified workers. And finally, it generates revenue to help sustain the safety system, such as certifying qualified workers, providing ongoing education, assessment and inspecting regulated work, or identifying and enforcing against individuals and companies who evade the safety system. Lastly, unpermitted work contributes to an unfair marketplace. This is because unpermitted work poses an unfair advantage to those performing this work and competing with individuals neglecting their regulatory obligations. So what happens when you don't take out a permit? Well, not taking out a permit is a non-compliance, and non-compliances can lead to enforcement action. So what does it mean to be non-compliant? A non-compliance is a failure of regulated product, equipment, or work to meet the applicable regulatory requirements. Performing work without a permit can pose a safety risk to the general public and needs to be addressed as soon as possible. So what happens when a non-compliance is identified? Upon completion of an inspection, a safety officer will issue a certificate of inspection to the duty holder, the person or company responsible for compliance, because they either own regulated product or perform regulated work. The certificate of inspection will indicate a date of correction. The duty holder is responsible for correcting the non-compliance by the date indicated. If an extension is required, the duty holder must contact BCSA to request that a safety officer grant additional time. If you disagree with the safety officer's decision, you have the right to request a safety manager review of the decision. This must be done within 30 days of the issuance of the certificate. If a duty holder neglects to correct non-compliances, BC Safety Authority has the authority under Section 11 of the Safety Standards General Regulations to require the surety or insurance company to cause work to be done to correct non-compliances in gas and electrical technologies. Now that you've learned about compliance and enforcement, let's review 3 key points. 1. Safety matters. Enforcement is just one of the tools BCSA uses to ensure safety. 2. Permits matter. Permits level the playing field, and permit avoidance can lead to enforcement action. 3. Compliance matters. Correct any non-compliance indicated on the certificate of inspection by the date indicated. If you're not able to correct the non-compliance by this date, contact your local safety officer to request an extension. Keep in mind that BC Safety Authority is here to help and support you, and enforcement is the last step to ensure everyone is playing by the same rules. If you have any questions or concerns about licensing, certification, or regulated work, contact your local safety officer. And if you have any other concerns, such as unlicensed work, unpermitted work, unsafe conditions or hazards, improper or unsafe work practices, or improper conduct by a BCSA employee, use our Report a Safety Risk services at www.safetyauthority.ca/contact/report a safety risk. Thanks for watching.